Hey guys, tonight we slip our dusty boots into a time and place that probably wouldn't forgive us for even a single mistake. Imagine the air buzzing with heat, grit sticking to your lips, and the endless rattle of wagon wheels carrying you across a land that feels more hostile than welcoming. You're about to arrive in a frontier town, small, suspicious, and ready to test your patience before you've even had your first sip of water. And here's the hard truth. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it there right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The stagecoach lurches one last time before grinding to a halt in the middle of a dusty street. Your back aches from hours of bouncing across rutted dirt paths, and as you step down, the sunlight punches you in the eyes. The air feels heavier than you expect, not with moisture, but with a dry heat that clings to your skin. The horses steam and snort, as tired of this endless land as you are. You stretch your stiff legs and instantly notice the way the locals look at you. Narrowed eyes from shaded porches, glances sharp enough to slice bread. You're not welcome, not yet. The town looks like it was thrown together in a hurry. Rough wooden buildings line the street, a saloon with swinging doors, a general store with a faded sign, maybe a blacksmith clanging away somewhere in the back. The smell of horses, sweat, and unwashed humanity mixes with the faint tang of gun oil. It isn't glamorous, it's raw, and already you're questioning your decision to come. You glance around for some comfort, but the choices are limited. There's no hotel, just a boarding house with a porch that creaks under its own weight. Dust swirls with every gust of wind, settling into your clothes, your hair, your throat. One unlucky cough reminds you of the worst reality here. Every breath tastes like grit. Historically, many Western towns weren't the bustling hubs shown in movies. Instead, they were small clusters of ramshackle buildings serving miners, ranchers, or travelers. Some sprang up overnight during gold or silver rushes, ballooning with desperate fortune seekers. But as quickly as they grew, they could just as easily vanish when the resources dried up. Imagine moving into a town only to find it abandoned a year later, leaving behind nothing but empty streets and sun-bleached wood. Of course, towns like Dodge City or Deadwood gained reputations for rowdiness and vice, but most settlements were quieter, unless a fight broke out at the saloon. And yes, fights did happen. You hear a glass shatter somewhere inside, followed by laughter too loud to sound safe. You decide maybe you're not thirsty after all. A quirky tidbit? Some stagecoach companies actually gave out rules of travel, reminding passengers not to shoot buffalo out the window and, more importantly, not to complain too loudly about discomfort. If you whined, the driver might just leave you behind. Imagine a Yelp review for that service, 1 star, because they abandoned me in rattlesnake country. Historians still argue whether the Wild West was truly lawless or simply a place with its own rough brand of order. Some records show towns had strict codes and surprisingly low crime rates, while others suggest that violence was as common as the dust storms. But standing here, with your boots sinking slightly into the dirt, you don't really care what historians debate. You just want to survive the afternoon. A boy runs past you, bare feet slapping against the dry ground, chasing a dog that looks like it hasn't had a bath since forever. He doesn't give you a second glance. That's how newcomers are treated here, ignored until proven useful or stared down until you leave. You're an outsider, and everyone knows it. Your stomach rumbles, reminding you that the last thing you ate was a lump of jerky miles back. The general store beckons with a promise of supplies, but the prices will knock the wind out of you. A sack of flour could cost several days' wages, and forget about fresh produce. It simply doesn't exist out here. As you pass the open doorway, you catch the smell of tobacco and leather, shelves lined with tin cans and tools. The shopkeeper eyes you the same way everyone else does, with suspicion first, calculation second. It hits you suddenly. This isn't your world. There are no safety nets, no refunds, no police force to protect you. If you mess up, you pay the price. And yet, people still came here by the thousands, driven by dreams of gold, land, or just the stubborn hope of starting fresh. You, however, already feel the edges of your patience fraying. As you settle on the porch rail, brushing dust off your sleeves in a futile gesture, you realize this is only day one. The sun hasn't even begun to set, and already your lips are cracked, your throat dry, and your nerves frayed by every sideways glance. Tomorrow will bring worse, more heat, more dust, more suspicion. And you know deep down that you probably won't survive this place. The sun doesn't just shine here, it rules. You step out from the sliver of shade cast by the general store, and instantly it feels as if someone tilted a magnifying glass over you. Heat bounces off the packed dirt street, rising in waves that shimmer like a mirage. Your shirt sticks to your back, sweat stings your eyes, and you could almost hear your skin begging for mercy. Sunscreen, of course, doesn't exist. Your best defense is a wide-brimmed hat, if you remember to bring one. By noon, the sun is a merciless overseer. Shadows shrink, leaving nowhere to hide, and every task becomes twice as exhausting. You try walking a short distance down the street, but within minutes, your lips are dry, your throat feels like sandpaper, and you're reconsidering whether that porch swing back at the boarding house might be the only safe place in town. Here's a fun historical fact. In the 1800s, frontier settlers actually used parasols and bonnets with fabric sewn long enough to cover the neck and shoulders. It wasn't about style, it was about survival. And yet, even with those makeshift shields, sunburns were a constant complaint. Imagine stepping into a saloon and every single person is peeling. Not the tough cowboy image Hollywood promised. You probably expect to sweat buckets in this climate, but it's worse than that. The air is so dry, your sweat evaporates before you even notice. You don't look drenched, you look fine, until dizziness sets in and suddenly your knees feel like jelly. Heat stroke is the silent ambush here, and if no one drags you into the shade, you're done. The quirky tidbit? Some settlers swore by carrying onions in their pockets, believing the pungent smell could ward off sunstroke. Spoiler, it didn't, but at least everyone around you probably gave you space, which is one way to keep cool. Historians still argue whether frontier life was harsher in summer or winter. Diaries and letters suggest both seasons felt like battles for survival. But in the West, the summer sun was the daily enemy. Too much exposure and you'd faint. Too little effort and your crops wouldn't grow. It was a cruel balance. You stumbled toward the well in the center of town, hoping for relief. The rope creaks, the bucket lowers, and when you finally haul it up, the water glitters in the light like liquid gold. But it's warm, almost hot, and carries a faint metallic taste. Still, you drink greedily, because anything is better than the cotton-mouthed misery gnawing at you. A local tips his hat and says, "Careful, drink too fast, you'll just lose it again." You're not sure if that's friendly advice or a veiled warning. The townsfolk, used to this punishing sun, move with a slowness you mistake for laziness. It's not. It's strategy. They save energy, duck into shadows, and plan their labor early in the morning or late in the evening. You, fresh off the stagecoach, try to keep pace and end up panting like a stray dog. It's a rookie mistake everyone spots immediately. And let's not forget, the sun isn't just painful, it's dangerous for your possessions too. Leather cracks, wooden wagon wheels warp, food spoils faster, even ink fades on paper, making it harder to preserve records or write letters home. Think about it. Your one heartfelt note back east, declaring you've made it out west, could be unreadable by the time it arrives, all thanks to the sun bleaching it out. By mid-afternoon, you're desperate for relief. You spot the saloon, its doors flapping open and closed with each patron. Inside it's cooler, or at least dimmer, and the air carries a mix of whiskey and cigar smoke that's oddly comforting after the relentless brightness. But sitting in the shadows only makes you dread stepping outside again. The sun is waiting, always waiting. It's inescapable. On the frontier, the sun decides your schedule, your energy, even your health. And as you drag yourself through the rest of the day, your skin tight and tingling from exposure, you realize the Wild West isn't just a story of guns and gold. It's a story of survival under the biggest, brightest, most merciless spotlight in the sky. By now, the sun has scorched you into submission, but the next enemy is far less dramatic and infinitely more irritating: dust. It doesn't wait for storms or horses to stir it up. It's simply everywhere, drifting through the air like invisible confetti designed to ruin your day. You try brushing it off your clothes, but it clings like a needy friend who just won't let go. Each step you take kicks up little clouds that rise and then settle back into your boots. Dust creeps into your socks, rubs your ankles raw, and sneaks under your shirt. You breathe it in, you chew it with every bite of food, and at night it will coat your blankets so that even your dreams taste gritty. A historical fact? Many frontier towns were literally nicknamed Hell on Wheels because they were built along railroad lines and constantly churned with activity. That activity meant dirt roads, hooves, wagon wheels, all stirring up dust that never really settled. Without paved streets, you were living in a permanent haze. You pause outside the blacksmith shop where sparks fly as iron strikes iron. The heat is intense, but what hits you hardest is the layer of fine powder already sticking to your sweaty skin. You try wiping your forehead, but your hand just smears the grime into a muddy streak. Congratulations, you've invented your own brand of frontier face paint. The quirky tidbit: people sometimes sprinkled water on dirt floors to keep the dust down. Sounds clever, right? Except in this climate, the water evaporated in minutes, leaving behind even stickier mud. Imagine slipping in your own living room because your dust solution turned into a mud puddle. Not exactly HGTV material. Historians still argue whether frontier families suffered more from disease caused by unsanitary conditions or from the endless dust irritating lungs and eyes. Letters from settlers complain about coughing fits, gritty food, and constant eye infections. Others downplay it, insisting people got used to it. You, however, are not getting used to it, not even close. You sit down on a rickety bench outside the saloon, trying to relax, but even that feels like defeat. A breeze kicks up, and suddenly the entire street disappears behind a curtain of swirling grit. You squint against it, cough, and shield your mouth with your sleeve, but the dust still finds its way in. Somewhere nearby, a horse snorts angrily, just as fed up with inhaling dirt as you are. Inside the boarding house later, you shake out your blanket and watch as a gray cloud rises around you. Dust in your bed, dust in your pillow, dust in your hair. It's not a visitor here, it's a roommate. And unlike a roommate, you can't argue with it or ask it to leave. You think about washing up, but water is precious, and soap costs more than you can comfortably spare. Settlers often had to ration water just for drinking and cooking, which meant bathing was rare. Add layers of dust to that equation, and suddenly every handshake in town feels like a gritty challenge. By now, your throat is scratchy, your teeth feel coated, and you're half convinced you'll cough up a dust bunny. The sun was cruel, but at least it left you with a visible enemy. Dust is sneakier. It invades slowly, endlessly, until you're too tired to care. So, as you collapse onto your dusty bed, the boards creaking underneath you, you realize something uncomfortable. You're not fighting one battle here, but dozens. Every day brings a new opponent, and tonight, that opponent is the dust settling softly over your blanket, daring you to breathe easy. Spoiler, you won't. The dust hasn't even left your throat when you feel a different kind of dryness, the social kind. Because as much as this land can grind you down with weather and grit, the people might finish you off faster. The town you stumbled into runs on suspicion, not hospitality. Every face you pass seems to measure your worth in silence, and so far, you're not impressing anyone. The saloon is still rattling with laughter and shouts. You step through the swinging doors, hoping for something familiar, a drink, maybe conversation. Instead, every eye lifts and locks on you. The piano stops. For a second, it's like you've walked onto a stage without knowing your lines. Then the room slowly resumes its rhythm, though you can feel the stairs lingering like smoke. You don't belong, and everyone knows it. Fact check. Frontier towns were magnets for drifters, gamblers, and outlaws. But contrary to Hollywood myths, most people weren't constantly dueling in the street. Instead, locals eyed newcomers with guarded caution. A stranger could be anyone, thief, con artist, or worse. Trust was earned slowly, often over years, and you've been here all of 6 hours. You order a drink, cheap whiskey that burns like fire on the way down, and try to relax. But the bartender doesn't chat. He just wipes the counter with the same rag that's been dirty since the Lincoln administration. At the back, a card game plays out, the players glancing at you in ways that make you wonder if you've already been marked as the night's entertainment. Quirky tidbit? Some saloons offered free lunch, salty meat, bread, and pickles meant to make you thirstier so you'd buy more drinks. So, congratulations. You get a meal and an even drier throat. It's the Wild West version of airline peanuts. Historians still argue whether these towns were close-knit communities or tense powder kegs. Diaries from settlers show both sides. Some speak warmly of neighbors sharing tools and food, while others describe constant paranoia and sudden violence. Standing here, you can see how both might be true. People might lend you a hand after they've figured out whether you're worth the risk. When you finally step outside again, dusk is falling. A group of locals lean against a post, murmuring to one another. You catch the flicker of eyes in your direction, hear a half-suppressed laugh. It could mean nothing, or it could mean they're testing you. Out here, the line between joke and threat is paper thin. The boarding house offers little comfort. The landlady gives you a stiff nod but doesn't ask your name. She's already decided she'll call you Room 2. That's all you are until you prove otherwise. A room number, a passing shadow. You flop onto the lumpy mattress, but your mind refuses to settle. You realize how fragile your situation is. You have no allies, no protection, and no reputation to lean on. A single false step, a wrong word, a bad debt, even just looking at someone the wrong way, and this community could chew you up and spit you out. In the movies, the Wild West is a playground for loners. In reality, the loner was often the first to starve, to get cheated, or to end up face down in the dust. Survival here depends on finding a place in the network, whether that's among ranch hands, miners, or townsfolk. Right now, you have none of that. As the night air cools and the boards creak under footsteps in the hallway, you roll onto your side, staring at the shadowy ceiling. Tomorrow will test you again, not just against heat or dust, but against the unspoken rule that everyone here already knows. Trust is scarce, and outsiders don't last long. Morning comes early, not because you're well rested, but because the town refuses to stay quiet. Horses clop down the street, wagon wheels grind, and someone is already hammering away at a stubborn nail. You blink the grit from your eyes, still tasting dust, and realize you're parched again. Yesterday's heat may have burned your skin, but today, your biggest problem announces itself loud and clear. Thirst. You shuffle outside, lips cracked, tongue sticking to the roof of your mouth. The memory of that lukewarm, metallic water from yesterday's well doesn't sound half bad now. You head toward the pump, bucket clanking in your hand. A couple of locals are already there, hauling water like it's their daily religion. Because it is. Here's the cold reality. Water in the Wild West wasn't guaranteed. Wells ran dry. Streams were often brackish, sometimes poisoned by runoff or animal waste. Entire towns could vanish when water sources failed. In fact, a number of settlements on the frontier were abandoned not because of raids or gold drying up, but simply because the wells stopped giving. No water, no town. You take a cautious sip and grimace. It's tepid, with a flavor halfway between pennies and mud. Still, it soothes your throat just enough to keep moving. You fill a tin cup, but a sharp-eyed woman nearby shakes her head. "Easy, stranger," she warns. "Too much too fast. You'll bring it back up." You nod and pretend you already knew that, but your stomach growls in protest. Quirky tidbit? Some travelers swore by coffee water, boiling whatever liquid they could find with a fistful of beans, not for taste, but to kill whatever bacteria might be lurking. The result? A brew that probably tasted like smoky swamp, but at least didn't kill you. Consider it the 19th century energy drink. Historians still argue whether the greatest killer of settlers was violence, disease, or dehydration. Records show waves of cholera and dysentery tearing through wagon trains, but letters home complain just as often about endless thirst and bad water. It's a toss-up, and frankly, you're not keen to test either outcome. As you sip sparingly, you notice how carefully everyone guards their buckets. A kid clutches his pail with both arms, glaring at you like you might snatch it away. Here, water isn't just survival, it's wealth. Cattle ranchers feud over rivers, farmers pray for rain, and even ordinary townsfolk eye the well like it's their town's heart. Without it, everything dies. You carry your bucket back to the boarding house, sloshing carefully, because spilling even a few drops feels criminal. The landlady sets out a basin for you to wash up, and you hesitate. Do you dip your hands and feel a moment of relief, or do you save it all for drinking? You choose to wash, just barely, and immediately regret watching the precious water darken with dust and grime. Waste never stings so much. Later, a ranch hand mentions casually that sometimes people fell into the well and contaminated it for weeks. You're suddenly very aware of every creak in that rope, every splash echoing up from below. This lifeline feels as fragile as your patience. By midday, your lips are split, and your thirst is still not quenched. The sun returns with its old cruelty, and you finally understand why settlers wrote songs and prayers for rain. A drizzle meant celebration. A downpour meant salvation. You, however, have nothing but a half-empty bucket and a whole lot of wishing. As evening falls and the last scraps of light fade, you realize water defines everything here. Who thrives, who fights, who leaves, and who dies. You cradle your cup like treasure, knowing full well that tomorrow it will taste worse, and you'll need more, and you'll still be thirsty. Your thirst is constant, but sooner or later, hunger barges in to claim its share of misery. You wake up with your stomach growling, only to remember the sad truth. The menu here is less farm-to-table freshness and more whatever didn't spoil on the way over. Forget juicy steaks or fluffy bread. Your options are beans, salt pork, and stale biscuits, if you're lucky. At the boarding house, breakfast is served without ceremony. A tin plate lands in front of you, holding a ladle of beans that taste vaguely metallic, and a slice of bread so hard you could use it as building material. The landlady shrugs as if to say, "That's what we've got." You chew carefully, trying not to crack a tooth, and force yourself to swallow. Calories are calories, after all. Fact check. The staple diet of settlers was indeed beans, bread, and salted meat. Vegetables were rare unless you grew them yourself, and fruit was practically a myth. Fresh milk soured quickly, and refrigeration didn't exist beyond a cool cellar. It's no wonder scurvy and malnutrition ran rampant. You don't need a medical degree to realize that eating the same thing every day leaves you weak and irritable. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some frontier cooks used cactus syrup as a sweetener, or crushed dried grasshoppers into flour when supplies ran short. Yes, grasshoppers. Suddenly, your plate of beans doesn't look so bad, until you remember you're still going to be eating the same beans tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. Historians still argue whether Western settlers suffered more from starvation or from the monotony of their diets. Some journals describe hunger gnawing at families during long winters, while others describe people simply losing the will to eat the same bland food day after day. Both are their own kind of suffering. In the saloon, the free lunch makes another appearance, sliced salted meat and pickles. It's salty enough to parch your throat, forcing you to buy another drink. Clever trick. You munch anyway, but it's like chewing a leather belt soaked in brine. One man at the bar chuckles at your grimace. "First week," he says, and you don't even bother denying it. You hear whispers of hunters bringing in wild game, rabbit, deer, even buffalo. But that's not an everyday reality. Most nights it's beans again, bubbling in an iron pot, with a chunk of pork tossed in more for flavor than actual sustenance. Even the smell wears thin after a while. Imagine the joy of stew night back home. Now picture dreading stew because it's your fourth bowl this week. You try nibbling slowly, convincing yourself it's hearty. But deep down, your body craves something fresh. A slice of fruit, a crisp vegetable, even a handful of greens. Instead, you settle for staring at a jar of pickled cabbage in the general store until you see the price tag and realize it costs nearly half a day's wages. You walk away, still hungry, still dreaming of oranges. By evening, your stomach is bloated with beans, but somehow not satisfied. You lie back, hands resting on your middle, wondering how anyone managed years of this diet without losing their minds. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they just got too tired to complain. And so you learn another lesson the West teaches with a smirk. Survival doesn't taste good. Out here, you eat what you have, not what you want. And you smile while you do it, because complaining won't change the menu. It'll just make the beans taste even worse. By now, your belly is full of beans you didn't want. Your lips are dry from the well water, and your skin still stings from yesterday's sun. All you want is rest, a quiet corner where you can collapse and forget about survival for a few hours. Unfortunately, the Wild West doesn't specialize in restful. Your shelter tonight is more trial than triumph. You push open the door of the boarding house room. The wooden floor creaks like it's protesting your arrival, and the air smells faintly of old smoke, sweat, and mothballs. A lumpy mattress squats in the corner, stuffed with straw that pokes through the ticking like tiny needles. You give it a cautious press. The mattress groans back at you, not encouragingly. Fact check. Most frontier homes and shelters were quickly built, often by the settlers themselves, with little more than rough-hewn logs, sod bricks, or hastily nailed planks. Sod houses, literally made from chunks of earth and grass, were common on the plains. They insulated well, but dripped dirt and bugs onto sleeping families whenever it rained. Romantic, isn't it? You flop down on the bed anyway, only to spring back up again when something skitters beneath the blanket. A beetle? A mouse? You're too tired to find out. Instead, you shake the bedding until a small gray puff of dust explodes around you. The blanket settles, heavier with grime than comfort. Here's a quirky tidbit. Settlers often stuffed cracks in the walls with rags, paper, or even mud to keep out the wind. It worked, but it also made for great nesting material for mice. Imagine drifting off to sleep while tiny claws scratch right behind your headboard. Sweet dreams indeed. Historians still argue whether sod houses were healthier than wooden cabins. Some claim the earth walls stayed cooler in summer and warmer in winter, making them more livable. Others insist the dampness and bugs outweighed the benefits. You don't need a historian. You just know you wouldn't want to wake up with centipedes crawling over your face. The boarding house doesn't even give you walls that solid. Drafts whistle through the gaps in the wood, and when you blow out the stub of a candle, you can still see streaks of moonlight poking in through the cracks. Privacy? Forget it. You hear every cough, shuffle, and snore from the rooms next door. One man groans in his sleep like he's fighting ghosts. Another mutters half a prayer that dies into snores. You wrap yourself in the scratchy blanket, trying to ignore the itch crawling along your skin. Lice were a common plague on the frontier, and though you don't want to jump to conclusions, the twitching along your scalp is hard to dismiss. You scratch, you sigh, and you resign yourself to a long night. At one point, rain begins to fall outside. Relief, you think, until it seeps through the thin roof, dripping directly onto your forehead. You shuffle to the other side of the bed, only to find another leak waiting there. By the time you drift toward sleep, your pillow is damp, your hair is damp, and your patience is wearing thin. The noises don't help. Coyotes yip somewhere in the distance, boards creak as though someone's walking in the hall, and the wind rattles the shutters until you're certain they'll blow off. You hug yourself tighter in the blanket and pretend you don't hear footsteps pausing just outside your door. By dawn, you've slept maybe an hour. Your back is sore from straw lumps, your scalp itches, and your clothes still smell faintly of smoke and sweat. Shelter, you realize, is relative. It doesn't have to be comfortable. It just has to keep you barely alive until morning. And even that feels like a gamble here. The morning doesn't greet you so much as it grabs you by the collar and shoves you into work. The West doesn't care if you're tired, sore, or still scratching from last night's lice. There's always something that needs doing. And if you're the newcomer in town, you don't get to be picky. You'll chop, dig, haul, or herd, because otherwise you'll starve. A ranch hand leans against the corral fence, chewing on a piece of straw like he's auditioning for a cliché. He eyes you up and down before tossing you a rope. Think you can handle a fence line? He asks. You hesitate, but what choice do you have? Out here, work equals food. No work, no beans. Fact check. Most settlers work sunup to sundown. Farmers planted and tended fields. Ranchers rode for miles to keep cattle in check, and even town dwellers hauled water, chopped wood, and did endless repairs. Idleness wasn't an option. You kept busy or you were branded useless, and useless people didn't last long. Within minutes, your shoulders are burning from hauling fence posts, your palms blistering on the rope. You fumble with knots, and the ranch hand shakes his head, muttering, "Green as spring grass." He doesn't mean it kindly. You tie, you untie, you tie again, and still the fence looks like it would collapse under the weight of a sneeze. Quirky tidbit? Cowboys often sang while riding herd at night, not just to pass the time, but to calm the cattle. Imagine a grown man crooning lullabies to a 1,000-pound animal that could trample him in seconds. Out here, even bedtime songs came with survival attached. Historians still argue whether frontier labor was harder for men or women. Men did the heavy outdoor work, but women carried their own crushing loads, hauling water, cooking, sewing, tending children, and keeping the household alive with almost no resources. Some letters from the time even joke, darkly, that a wife's workday never ended, not even in her sleep. By midday, your back is slick with sweat, your hands are raw, and you've developed a new appreciation for the phrase back-breaking labor. The ranch hand tosses you a chunk of bread and a strip of jerky for lunch, and you chew it silently while sitting on the fence you've been failing to fix. He doesn't bother asking how you like the work. He already knows you don't. The afternoon brings wood chopping. The axe handle feels wrong in your hands, heavy and awkward. Your first swing buries the blade crookedly, jarring your arms all the way to the elbows. The second swing misses entirely, earning a laugh from a boy no older than 12 who's splitting logs like he was born with an axe in his hands. You grit your teeth and keep swinging, because quitting isn't an option. By the time the sun dips low, your muscles are trembling, Your shirt clings with salt-streaked sweat, and your hands throb with fresh blisters. You've earned a single silver coin for your trouble, just enough to cover another night at the boarding house and maybe a meal. The ranch hand pockets the rest, reminding you that wages here stretch about as far as your patience. As you limp back into town, the dust rising with each step, you realize something sharp. This isn't a heroic adventure. It's drudgery, relentless, exhausting, spirit-draining drudgery, the kind that grinds you down until you stop noticing how sore you are and just accept that pain is the price of survival. When you finally collapse onto your straw mattress, every joint screaming, you understand why so many settlers wrote home about the cruel labor of the frontier. The Wild West doesn't reward effort, it demands it, endlessly, without thanks. And tomorrow, it will demand again. You thought walking down a dusty street or chopping wood was challenging, but travel in the Wild West redefines misery. Even the shortest journey feels endless. You lurch onto a wagon for a trip to the neighboring town, hoping for a fresh perspective, or at least a change of scenery. Instead, you're immediately reminded how punishing travel can be out here. The wagon creaks like it's protesting every bump in the dirt road. Dust rises in clouds, coating your clothes, your hair, and your teeth. Horses strain at the harness, muscles slick with sweat, nostrils flaring, as if they too are silently asking why humans insist on this. Every jolt sends your knees against the wooden bench, bruising your legs and rattling your teeth. Welcome to the slowest roller coaster you'll ever experience. Fact check. Wagons were the primary mode of transportation for settlers, but roads were little more than trails. Mud in spring, dust in summer, and snow or ice in winter made even a short journey grueling. Travelers often covered only a few miles an hour, enduring discomfort for days or weeks. You quickly learn that patience isn't just a virtue, it's survival. A quirky tidbit. Some wagons carried tiny sneeze boxes, essentially cloth bags tucked in corners so passengers could spit or cough without spraying everyone nearby. It sounds hygienic, but in practice, dust quickly clogged them, and passengers often ended up coughing into the wind anyway. Imagine thinking you had a brilliant idea only for the West to humbly disagree. Historians still argue whether the greatest danger of frontier travel was terrain, weather, or human conflict. Records suggest equal casualties from rattlesnake bites, robbery, and wagon accidents. You don't need numbers to realize every mile feels like a negotiation with fate itself. Midway through your journey, the landscape changes from flat plains to uneven hills. Your wagon jolts again and again, tossing your arms, legs, and pride into the air. The horses snort, their hooves kicking up clouds of dust that sting your eyes. Blisters form on your hands from gripping the rough wooden sides, and every bump is like a reminder that comfort here is a fantasy. Bandits, of course, are a constant threat, even if the local sheriff isn't. You pass a narrow canyon where some say a gang once held up a stagecoach, robbing passengers and disappearing into the brush. The story sticks in your mind as you clutch the bench for stability, each shadow along the trail flickering ominously. Even if it's just your imagination, the fear sharpens your awareness. By the time you reach your destination, legs trembling and arms numb, the neighboring town doesn't feel welcoming. It feels like another gauntlet. Water is just as scarce, streets just as dusty, and the locals just as suspicious. But at least you survived the trail. That's small comfort when you realize tomorrow may require a longer journey, or worse, one on foot. You collapse in an alleyway for a moment, the sun dipping low. Your back aches, your muscles scream, and the dust seems determined to enter every pore. Each step out here is a negotiation, a minor victory over relentless discomfort. And somehow, despite every hardship, you're still moving forward, proving that even when the West seems determined to beat you down, persistence counts for something. By nightfall, as you settle into a borrowed cot in the neighboring town, you reflect on just how exhausting this life is. The journey itself is a constant reminder. In the Wild West, the land is indifferent, and every mile traveled is earned in sweat, blisters, and cautious optimism. Money, or the lack of it, becomes immediately apparent as you try to navigate life here. You thought surviving dust, sun, and labor would be the main challenge, but you quickly discover that even a single meal or a night's lodging can feel like a luxury. Every coin counts, every transaction is a negotiation, and your purse feels alarmingly light. You walk down the main street, eyes scanning the general store and saloon menus. Prices for basics seem outrageous. A loaf of bread costs more than a day's wage. Flour barely covers a meal for a family, and even beans have a price that reminds you just how tight survival is. You clutch your handful of coins and feel a twinge of panic. One wrong decision, and tomorrow will be a nightmare of hunger and thirst. Fact check. Wages on the frontier were low, and prices for goods were high. Settlers often relied on bartering or credit, but stores could be merciless. Inflation was common, especially in boom towns during gold or silver rushes. Money wasn't just wealth, it was survival. Miscalculate, and you went hungry. Quirky tidbit? Some towns issued scrip, a sort of store-only currency, to keep workers spending locally. It was convenient for store owners, but terrible for travelers, who couldn't use it elsewhere. You might earn a day's labor in scrip and have nothing to buy proper clothing or medicine, which is basically the Wild West's version of being paid in coupons. Historians still argue whether frontier economic hardship or physical danger claimed more settlers' lives. Some journals describe families with enough food but no coins to pay rent, while others chronicle bandit attacks or disease. Both leave the same impression. Uncertainty was constant. You try your luck at a small saloon poker game, not to win, just to see if you can stretch your coins a little. Cards are dealt, and your hands feel clumsy, unfamiliar. You fold, bluff, and lose. The coins you risked vanish in minutes, leaving you with just enough to cover a night at the boarding house. Every wager, every transaction feels like walking a tightrope over an invisible pit. By mid-afternoon, your stomach grumbles again. You eye the general store, debating whether to buy beans or pay for a slice of meat. The clerk watches you, silently judging your indecision. One wrong choice, and you'll go hungry tonight. You start calculating in your head, realizing every day is a constant budget puzzle. Labor, food, lodging, water, and the odd coin for emergencies. The harsh lesson hits. Money here is not just currency, it's freedom. Without it, you're trapped, powerless, constantly negotiating with circumstance and neighbors. Even skilled laborers could find themselves penniless, and those without any skills? They vanished, sometimes literally, drifting away or succumbing to hunger and exposure. By evening you sit on the porch, counting coins and rationing meals in your mind. Even a modest success, like earning a day's wage, feels fragile. Tomorrow could erase it in a single misstep, a broken wagon wheel, a lost bet, or a price hike in the general store. The West doesn't reward caution or competence. It rewards resilience, luck, and the stubborn refusal to give up. As night falls, you realize that surviving here isn't just about avoiding heat, dust, or danger. It's about keeping your purse, your stomach, and your sense of hope intact, all while knowing that tomorrow the struggle begins again, perhaps in a slightly different form, but never easier. Even with dust, sun, hunger, and tight coins, the Wild West has another invisible enemy: law, or more accurately, the lack of it. Justice isn't guaranteed here. Sheriffs exist, sure, but they're stretched thin, and the rest of the time towns rely on vigilantes, rumor, and personal grudges. One wrong glance or poorly timed joke, and you could find yourself in trouble before you even know what happened. You walk down the main street, ears alert. A man leans against a post, a rifle slung lazily across his shoulder. A brawl broke out earlier at the saloon, tables smashed, chairs flying, but nobody intervened. You wonder, is this normal? Should you duck inside or pretend not to notice? In the Wild West, ignoring trouble is often the safest bet, even if it means watching injustice unfold. Fact check. Frontier towns had formal law enforcement, but it was inconsistent. Some towns boasted diligent sheriffs and deputy teams, while others relied on makeshift rules enforced by whichever influential citizen could muster the biggest posse. Vigilante justice, sometimes brutal, sometimes surprisingly fair, was common. The threat of violence was ever present, and resolving disputes could be deadly. Quirky tidbit? Some towns had shooting galleries where residents could practice marksmanship, not for sport, but so they'd be ready if a lawless day turned ugly. Imagine learning how to defend yourself as part of daily life, kind of like gym class, but with pistols. Historians still argue whether the Wild West was truly lawless or just misunderstood. Romanticized accounts emphasize gunfights and chaos, while primary sources show that many towns maintained surprising stability. Still, the unpredictability kept newcomers on edge. You don't need historical analysis, you just need nerves of steel. You pass the blacksmith, noticing a group arguing over a loan gone wrong. Voices rise, hands twitch toward holsters, and someone mutters the words, "Frontier Justice." A moment later, they part without shots fired, but the tension lingers like smoke. You realize that watching from the sidelines is safer than taking sides, at least until you understand the local hierarchy. A stranger carrying fresh lumber approaches you, explaining that the sheriff rarely intervenes unless property or life is immediately threatened. For everything else, disputes are settled by reputation, persuasion, or brute force. You nod, trying to appear confident, but inside your heart is hammering like a blacksmith's mallet. One misstep, and your reputation, or lack thereof, could make you a target. By nightfall, you reflect on just how delicate life here is. You can work hard, follow rules, and still find yourself on the losing end of someone else's bad day. Law is present, but only as a guideline, a suggestion, not a guarantee. Out here, survival is about reading people as much as you read the land. And as you lie down on your rough straw mattress, the echoes of midday arguments and the distant yips of coyotes reminding you that the West has no patience for mistakes, you realize that understanding the rules, or lack thereof, is as critical as knowing where the next meal, water, or coin will come from. Misjudgment carries consequences heavier than any sunburn or blisters you've endured so far. By now, the relentless heat, dust, hunger, and precarious law enforcement have combined into a single oppressive weight pressing on your shoulders. But the Wild West adds one more layer of challenge: illness. Disease spreads quickly in crowded towns, and medical care is rudimentary at best. One minor scrape, cough, or fever could escalate into something far more serious. You wake with a scratchy throat, a dull ache behind your eyes, and a sense that something is off. You glance around your boarding room, the straw mattress already feeling like a cradle for germs. Settlers didn't enjoy the luxury of antiseptic wipes or over-the-counter medicine. Bandages were improvised from rags. Fevers were treated with cold water or herbal tinctures, and antibiotics were centuries away. You wonder whether this scratchy feeling is just fatigue or a prelude to something worse. Fact check. Common illnesses like cholera, dysentery, and influenza claimed more lives than gunfights or storms. Medical knowledge was limited, and frontier doctors were few. Many families relied on home remedies, often with questionable effectiveness. Small wounds could become fatal infections. Settlers constantly walked the line between resilience and disaster. Quirky tidbit: some settlers used rattlesnake venom as an ingredient in poultices, believing it could heal wounds. It's hard to say whether it worked or just made things itch worse, but people swore by it. The frontier had a penchant for inventive, if bizarre, medicine. Historians still argue whether mortality rates were worse for children or adults on the frontier. Diaries record both infant deaths from disease and adults succumbing to untreated injuries. Every cough and scrape felt like a risk, a reminder that life could be short if you weren't careful. You venture out, cautiously sipping water, careful not to aggravate your throat. The townsfolk greet each other warily, their own health likely compromised from dust, heat, and the rigors of labor. Even minor complaints like a scratchy throat or upset stomach were viewed pragmatically. Either you tough it out or you don't last. Inside the saloon, someone mentions a fever going around. You feel a shiver run down your spine, the combination of sweat and worry making you realize just how fragile the human body is here. Exposure, diet, and exhaustion have already worn you down. Disease feels like a final, invisible enemy waiting in the shadows. By late afternoon, the ache in your head worsens. Your stomach feels uneasy, despite rationing meals carefully. You try not to dwell on the possibility of dysentery or influenza, but every twinge of discomfort seems magnified. You realize that staying alive in the West requires more than avoiding heat or dust. It requires luck, knowledge, and a bit of stoicism. You consider visiting the town doctor. The building is small, and inside, the smell of herbs, tinctures, and unwashed hands hits you immediately. The doctor, barely taller than a broomstick, nods gravely and gives advice that is equal parts wisdom and superstition. You nod back, wishing you understood more than half of it, and leave feeling only slightly reassured. By evening, your energy is low, your body protesting, and your mind buzzing with the awareness that sickness could strike at any time. The West doesn't provide second chances. You pull the blanket tight, hoping sleep will act as a shield, even if it only offers a few hours of reprieve from the unyielding grind. The sun rises again, relentless as ever, but today your body feels even heavier than usual. Between exhaustion, blisters, and the lingering scratchiness from yesterday's illness, even standing seems like a chore. You trudge toward the corral, where the ranch hand is already hollering orders at the horses. There's no pause for pity. The West has no patience for weakness. Fact check. Frontier settlers endured grueling physical labor daily, often without adequate rest. Fields needed tending, livestock needed herding, and repairs to buildings, fences, and wagons never ended. Overexertion was common, and injuries were routine. Settlers simply learned to push through, or they didn't survive. You try lifting a bale of hay, muscles quivering from yesterday's work, and the creeping fatigue of sickness. The straw pokes at your arms, and sweat drips into your eyes, stinging as though it's mocking your weakness. One misstep, and the bale slips, narrowly missing your toes, and you swear the horses are laughing at your incompetence. Quirky tidbit? Some ranchers carried cats in the stables to chase away mice, but these cats often became mischievous, knocking over feed sacks and adding chaos to the daily grind. Even animals had their own way of reminding you who ruled the corral. Historians still argue whether frontier fatigue was more dangerous than environmental hazards. Some claim exhaustion caused more accidents than storms or gunfire. Others emphasize exposure and disease. Either way, you feel evidence of both as your arms ache and your stomach twists uneasily. By noon, you're dripping sweat under the unrelenting sun. You notice your hands. The skin is peeling, the blisters already hardened, and each movement sends a jolt of pain up your arms. You realize that even mundane chores, like lifting hay or tightening a harness, are battles in themselves. You pause at the water trough, dipping a hand into the cool liquid to rinse the grit from your face. The sensation is fleeting relief. Even the animals seem tired. The horses shift their weight lazily, ears twitching at the wind. You watch them and wonder how anyone could endure these conditions day after day, year after year. The quirks of frontier life reveal themselves here, too. A neighbor mentions that some ranchers would rub mud into their skin to prevent sunburn, an improvised sunscreen that smelled faintly of rot and dust. You can't imagine the smell, and yet the logic makes a kind of grim sense. Whatever keeps you alive is worth enduring. By late afternoon, you notice a faint dizziness creeping in, a combination of exhaustion, sun, and lingering dehydration. You stumble back toward town, hoping for a respite, but know deep down that boarding house won't be comfortable, and dinner will be basic at best. Still, you keep moving, because pausing feels like surrender. Night falls, and as you collapse on the straw mattress once more, you understand a harsh truth. The West doesn't wait for you to recover. It demands labor, endurance, and constant vigilance. Every day is a negotiation with the land, the weather, and your own frail body. You drift to sleep only because tomorrow won't give you a choice. You'll be back at it, whether your muscles and spirit are ready or not. By the 14th day, or what feels like the 14th day, your sense of time blurred by fatigue, heat, and dust, you realize survival in the West isn't just physical, it's mental. Every decision carries weight. Every glance could signal danger, and every misstep might cost you more than pride. Your body is sore, your stomach perpetually unsettled, and your brain constantly calculating risk. But the most exhausting battle is internal. You sit on the porch of the saloon, dust clinging to your sweat-streaked clothes, watching townsfolk go about their routines. They nod or barely glance your way. You're a newcomer, and that means invisibility, sometimes a blessing, sometimes a curse. Even basic conversation is a minefield. One wrong word, one misread gesture, and you could become a target for ridicule, or worse. Fact check. Settlers frequently commented on the mental strain of frontier life.
Diaries reveal bouts of depression, anxiety, and melancholy from isolation and constant vigilance. Survival wasn't just about muscle, it demanded careful attention to social cues and environmental hazards. Quirky tidbit: some townsfolk carried lucky charms, pieces of turquoise, rabbit's feet, or even a carved bone to ward off misfortune. Whether it worked or was simply placebo, it highlights just how uncertain life was. Belief in luck became as crucial as skill or strength. Historians still argue whether isolation or physical danger posed a greater threat to settlers' well-being. Letters describe both the psychological toll of solitude and the constant awareness of violence or disease. Out here, you experience both firsthand. A slight breeze rustles the boardwalk as a child runs past, trailing a cloud of dust. He pauses briefly, eyeing you with curiosity, before darting back inside. You wonder if you'll ever feel as comfortable here as that boy, carefree and seemingly immune to the relentless demands of the land. Probably not, you think, and your lips twitch at the grim humor. You attempt to write a letter home, but the dust gets everywhere. Your ink smudges, your quill scratches the paper, and each line feels like a battle against time and environment. Even this small modern convenience becomes an ordeal. Settlers often abandoned writing when conditions were too harsh, fearing the effort outweighed the result. Even social interactions require calculation. A handshake might establish trust or spark suspicion. A casual remark could offend or amuse, depending on someone else's mood. You learn quickly that words, like every other resource, must be rationed. Miscommunication is a form of danger the textbooks rarely mention. As evening falls, you finally rest your head against the lumpy pillow, realizing the mental load is heavier than your aching back. Survival in the West is about constant calculation, careful observation, and a tolerance for discomfort most people today couldn't imagine. Tomorrow promises another full day, but tonight you allow yourself the smallest indulgence, the faint hope that perhaps, just perhaps, you might last another sunrise. By now you've endured the sun, dust, hunger, labor, lawlessness, illness, and the mental strain of constant vigilance. But the Wild West has yet another surprise. The animals, not just the livestock, which are demanding enough, but the wild creatures that seem to exist solely to remind you that you are, in fact, mortal. A rattlesnake in the tall grass, a pack of coyotes yipping at night, even a lone horse refusing to cooperate. Each encounter tests your nerves, reflexes, and luck. You trudge along the edge of a prairie, the golden grass brushing your legs and concealing threats beneath its sway. The wind shifts, carrying with it the sharp metallic scent of danger, snakes, scorpions, or worse. Every step requires attention, or else you risk a painful, perhaps deadly, encounter. You curse yourself for not carrying a proper walking stick, or at least a bigger dose of courage. Fact check: encounters with wild animals were common on the frontier. Settlers often faced rattlesnakes, wolves, mountain lions, and bears. Even domesticated livestock could be hazardous, trampling inexperienced handlers or kicking unpredictably. Knowing how to read animal behavior wasn't optional, it was survival. A quirky tidbit: some pioneers carried snake oil remedies, literally concoctions from local plants claimed to prevent or cure bites. Whether effective or snake-charming superstition, the bottles were popular and sometimes surprisingly potent, or just glorified placebos. You wonder if the traveling salesman ever demonstrated their products on live snakes. Probably not a good idea. Historians still argue whether wildlife or human threats were more deadly on the frontier. Records show fatalities from predatory animals were significant, but encounters with bandits, gunfights, and disputes arguably claimed more. Either way, you now understand the lesson. Nature isn't just scenic, it's relentless. A herd of cattle crosses your path, and the lead steer decides your boots are a personal target. You hop aside, but not before your foot slips in the loose dirt, and you nearly face plant in front of a group of amused cowhands. They laugh, shaking their heads. You force a grin, realizing humility and a quick reaction are as essential as strength. By mid-afternoon, the sun hangs high, and the prairie shimmers in waves of heat. You pause for water, hoping the ration will last, but even the small drink feels insufficient. Every animal encounter, every misstep, every jolt of adrenaline drains you further. Survival isn't just physical, it's a series of constant calculations about risk and response. A hawk circles overhead, a silent observer of your clumsy progress. You pause to watch it, envying the effortless grace it commands. Then, with a flick of its wings, it disappears, reminding you that in this land, only the alert survive, and only the adaptable endure. By evening, you return to the boarding house, boots dusty and muscles quivering. The straw mattress awaits, lumpy and uncomfortable, but somehow comforting in its consistency. You lay down, every joint aching, every nerve on edge, and reflect. Animals here aren't villains, they're teachers, constantly reminding you how fragile human life really is when every day is a negotiation with nature. By now, the rhythm of the West is starting to feel like a relentless drumbeat. Dust in your mouth, sun on your back, and labor that never truly ends. But one thing you hadn't fully appreciated yet is the weather. Not just the blazing sun or sudden rainstorms, but the extremes that seem designed to test your endurance. Heat waves that melt resolve, freezing nights that sap energy, and winds so fierce they strip your patience along with your skin. You step outside at dawn to find frost glittering on rooftops, tiny crystals catching the first sunlight. Your breath hangs in the air, a visible reminder that winter doesn't care whether you're prepared. Yesterday's labor feels distant, replaced by the bone-deep chill that sinks into your clothes and your muscles. You wrap your coat tighter, already regretting the lack of proper layering. Fact check. Frontier weather was brutal and unpredictable. Settlers faced scorching summers, bitter winters, sudden storms, and flash floods. Housing and clothing often offered minimal protection, and exposure-related illnesses were common. A simple miscalculation could mean frostbite or heat exhaustion, or worse. A quirky tidbit: some settlers fashioned their own rudimentary thermometers using alcohol-filled glass tubes, trusting them over local weather forecasts, which were basically educated guesses or folk wisdom. You glance at the sky and realize that, for all your modern comfort, the weather here demands respect, not gadgets. Historians still argue whether weather or human conflict posed the greater threat to survival. Diaries describe entire families lost to blizzards or relentless sun, and yet disputes and raids also claimed lives. You start to see that the West doesn't play favorites. Danger comes from every direction. By mid-morning, the sun returns, burning off the frost and turning the prairie into a shimmering, mirage-filled expanse. Sweat beads on your forehead instantly. You feel the familiar sting of dehydration creeping in. Even a short walk across town leaves you parched, muscles tight, and head throbbing. Every step is negotiation. How fast can you move without collapsing? How much water can you ration? How long until the next source of shade? A sudden wind gust tosses dust into your eyes and mouth. You cough, blinking furiously, and watch as it sweeps across the streets, carrying sand, grit, and debris into every corner. Even indoors, the wind seems to find a way to invade, rattling shutters and whistling through cracks. Comfort is a fleeting concept, here more imagined than real. You pause near a creek, cautiously kneeling to sip water. It's cold and bracing, almost sweet, but even here, the currents and mud remind you that nature is indifferent to your suffering. Settlers learned to treat water with caution, boiling, straining, and rationing, because illness was as dangerous as thirst. By evening, the wind dies down, leaving a quiet but heavy silence. You watch shadows stretch across the town, stretching like fingers toward the horizon. The temperature drops rapidly, and you pull your blanket tight around your shoulders. Weather here isn't just a backdrop, it's an active participant, shaping every action, every movement, every decision. You realize the West doesn't merely challenge you physically or mentally, it does so elementally, shaping who survives and who doesn't. The daily grind, the weather, the dust, the food, the law, or lack thereof, each layer of the Wild West's challenge builds upon the last. But tonight, you're confronted with another subtle, often overlooked threat: boredom. Isolation, repetition, and endless labor create a mental fatigue that feels heavier than physical exhaustion. Time stretches like the endless prairie, and your mind starts inventing problems simply to stay busy. You wander down the empty street, boots crunching on the dust, watching the horizon flare with the dying light of sunset. Everything seems still, yet every movement carries tension. A shutter rattles, a dog barks in the distance, and your mind leaps to every possible danger. You realize boredom isn't absence of action. It's the persistent hum of anxiety, the mental itch that can wear a person down faster than a pack of coyotes. Fact check. Settlers often commented on the psychological strain of isolation. Diaries recount hours spent counting fence posts, repairing wagons, or walking miles with little purpose beyond survival. This mental monotony contributed to depression, poor decision-making, and sometimes even despair. Quirky tidbit: some frontier towns held reading circles or storytelling evenings to stave off boredom. Residents would gather to hear news, gossip, or tales of adventure, often exaggerated or outright fabricated. It was entertainment, but also survival. Keeping minds active helped stave off despair, which was just as deadly as the sun or scorpions. Historians still argue whether mental fatigue or physical danger contributed more to early settler mortality. While diseases, gunfights, and exposure killed many, journals suggest that prolonged stress and isolation significantly reduced lifespan even in otherwise healthy individuals. Out here, boredom is lethal in its own slow, insidious way. You find yourself at the saloon again, nursing a cup of weak coffee and listening to the murmur of townsfolk. Conversation is polite, cautious, and punctuated by pauses that feel longer than minutes. You try to engage, but words stumble over one another. Your tongue feels foreign in your mouth, your mind half crawling with exhaustion. Even small talk feels like a workout. By nightfall, you retreat to the boarding house, longing for the solace of your lumpy straw mattress. Sleep doesn't come easily. The mind, trained to anticipate danger, resists rest. You stare at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the wooden beams, imagining stories for each one, because doing nothing is too risky. Even at rest, the West demands attention. You curl into your blanket, aware that the monotony will continue tomorrow, another day of heat, dust, labor, scarce water, and endless calculation. You might laugh, you might sigh, or you might just accept that mental endurance is as crucial as physical strength. Out here, survival is a mind game as much as a muscle game, and losing either can be fatal. You thought yesterday's fatigue, dust, and endless chores would prepare you for the next day, but today proves otherwise. Out here, there's always a twist, a hidden layer of difficulty that no one warns you about. Today, it's fire, the unpredictable, uncontrollable element that humbles even the most experienced settler. A neighbor yells as smoke curls over the rooftops, black and acrid against the blue sky. You drop whatever you were carrying and run, heart hammering. The fire doesn't wait for heroes or newcomers. It simply spreads, consuming dry brush, timber, and sometimes entire buildings before anyone can react. You join others in hauling buckets, digging fire breaks, and attempting to control what seems entirely beyond control. Fact check. Fires were a constant threat on the frontier. Wooden structures, dry grass, and limited water sources meant that even a small spark could grow into a catastrophic blaze. Entire towns were sometimes destroyed in hours, leaving settlers homeless and destitute. Quirky tidbit? Some settlers tried to fight fire with blankets or even dirt, smothering flames in a desperate attempt to save homes. The methods were often as improvised as they were ineffective, but panic and ingenuity combined in creative, if sometimes absurd, ways. Historians still argue whether human error or natural conditions caused the majority of frontier fires. While careless cooking, lantern accidents, and sparks were common, droughts and wind often turned small mishaps into disasters. Either way, preparedness or luck was everything. By afternoon, the blaze is partially contained, but the scorch smell lingers everywhere, clinging to clothes, hair, and the taste of dust in your mouth. You cough and swallow, feeling the thin line between relief and exhaustion. The labor is brutal, the heat from the flames mixing with the sun's relentless rays, baking your skin as you work. The town's animals sense the danger too. Horses whinny nervously, chickens scatter, and dogs bark incessantly. You realize that survival isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about anticipating and reacting to every living creature, every shifting ember, and every breath of wind. By evening, the fire is finally out, leaving charred patches across the landscape and a lingering sense of vulnerability. You sit on a scorched fence post, hands blistered, clothes singed slightly at the edges, and reflect on the wild unpredictability of the West. Each day brings a new test, often unexpected, always relentless. As you return to the boarding house, dusted with ash and sweat, the mattress looks both inviting and terrifying. You collapse onto it, every muscle trembling. But even as your body relaxes, your mind remains alert. The West doesn't allow complete rest, not for long, not for anyone. You close your eyes, aware that tomorrow will bring more trials, more labor, and more surprises, and that survival is never guaranteed. By now, you've endured dust, sun, hunger, labor, illness, wildlife, boredom, and even fire. Yet the Wild West saves one of its sharpest lessons for last: unpredictability. Every day carries the potential for sudden danger. Thieves, stampedes, or even the simplest mishap can turn your world upside down in a heartbeat. You begin to understand that constant vigilance is not paranoia, it's survival. You trudge toward the edge of town, watching the horizon for signs of trouble.
A distant cloud of dust catches your eye, and your stomach tightens. Horses? A herd gone astray? Or something worse, like bandits taking advantage of the open prairie? Instinct kicks in. Every muscle tightens. Every sense sharpens. You move with a calculated caution, because out here, mistakes are costly. Fact check. Frontier life was extraordinarily unpredictable. Settlers faced sudden storms, flash floods, runaway livestock, bandits, and even conflicts with indigenous tribes. The unpredictability of daily life demanded adaptability, quick thinking, and constant awareness. A single moment of inattention could have serious consequences. Quirky tidbit: some settlers carried panic whistles or rattles to scare away both animals and potential attackers. It's almost humorous now, imagining a grown adult running across the prairie waving a whistle at a coyote. But it was a serious strategy for those who had few other defenses. Historians still argue whether settlers underestimated or overestimated threats. Some journals detail overreactions to ordinary events, while others recount fatal encounters with dangers no one anticipated. Either way, you quickly learn that assuming safety is a luxury you cannot afford. By mid-afternoon, a stampede erupts just beyond the corral. Panic sets in as hundreds of hooves pound the dirt, sending shockwaves up through the ground and rattling your teeth. You dive for cover, heart pounding, praying your boots won't get caught. Animals are everywhere: horses, cattle, even a strayed dog weaving through chaos. You realize that nature and domesticated animals alike have their own agenda, one that rarely aligns with human survival. When the dust settles, your shirt is soaked with sweat, dirt clings to your skin, and your nerves are frayed. Even so, life in town must go on. Repairs, labor, and survival don't pause for adrenaline or exhaustion. You limp toward the general store, muscles screaming, and wonder how anyone could maintain sanity in such constant chaos. By evening, as you collapse on the straw mattress, the sheer unpredictability of the West settles over you like a heavy blanket. Each day has its own challenges, some expected, many not. You close your eyes, feeling both relief and dread, knowing tomorrow will bring new trials. Adaptability, resilience, and sheer stubbornness have become your best allies. The Wild West isn't just a landscape, it's a test, and you're still learning how to endure it. By the time night falls, you've come to a quiet, exhausted understanding. Surviving the Wild West isn't a matter of skill alone, nor of strength, luck, or even sheer determination. It's all of those things combined, stretched to their limits, and tested every single day. You lie on your lumpy straw mattress, muscles aching, lungs still tasting of dust, and mind replaying the endless lessons of this unforgiving land. The stars twinkle above, distant and indifferent, and the wind rustles the boards outside, whispering the same lesson it has for weeks. The West doesn't cater to comfort. Your back aches, your hands blister, your stomach grumbles, and your head throbs. Yet you realize that despite every hardship, heat, cold, dust, lawlessness, illness, wild animals, fire, monotony, you've lasted this long. Each small survival feels like a quiet victory, though you suspect tomorrow will demand more. Fact check. Life on the frontier was unforgiving, and average lifespans were shorter than in settled regions. Many settlers succumbed to disease, accidents, or exposure long before old age. Survival required constant attention to every detail: food, shelter, labor, and health. Even the smallest mistake could have serious consequences. A quirky tidbit: some settlers carried small trinkets for luck, a coin tucked in a boot, a feather in a hat, or a bit of string knotted in a specific way. Whether superstition or psychological crutch, these little rituals were a reminder that in a world of uncertainty, control over something, however small, mattered. Historians still argue whether the frontier experience was primarily heroic or tragic. While tales romanticize cowboys, pioneers, and explorers, the day-to-day reality was far less glamorous, often grueling, monotonous, and dangerous. You've seen enough of both to understand why. As you slowly relax into the mattress, the dust, sweat, and aches all merge into a hazy backdrop for reflection. You remember the blistered hands on fence posts, the rattlesnake in the tall grass, the fire raging across the prairie, and the constant balancing act of coins, chores, and survival. Every moment, every step, every decision required attention, energy, and perseverance. And yet, somehow, you're still here, breathing, alert, and learning. The Wild West may have tried to break you, but lying here now, you appreciate the lessons it's forced upon you: patience, observation, humility, and resilience. Survival isn't a one-time victory. It's a daily negotiation, a constant adaptation, a careful dance with dust, danger, and discomfort. Even if you never truly feel safe, even if your body protests, and even if every day seems like a battle, the simple act of lasting another day is a triumph in itself. The night is deep now, cool air brushing against your face. You let the rhythm of your breath slow, letting the memories of sun, dust, sweat, and stars fade. Tomorrow will come as relentless as today, but for this moment, you can rest. Now, feel your muscles unwind, your heartbeat slow, and the dust settle. The prairie is silent, the animals rest, and the wind's whisper softens to a lullaby. You've survived another day, and for tonight, that's enough. The West may not forgive weakness, but it rewards persistence, and you've earned a brief, quiet peace. As your body sinks deeper into the mattress, the relentless energy of the day softens into gentle exhaustion. The sun has set, the town quieted, and even the wind, once harsh and insistent, whispers softly across the wooden boards. You feel your muscles relax, each ache and blister fading into the background, replaced by a calm rhythm of breath and heartbeat. Think of the prairie stretching endlessly under the stars, the wide open sky shimmering in silver and indigo. Dust settles on the horizon, no longer harsh or suffocating, but part of a quiet landscape that has tested your endurance and resilience. The sounds of the night, distant coyotes, soft rustling grass, the occasional creak of a barn, become gentle companions, reminders that life continues at its own pace. Even the challenges you faced, blisters, fatigue, hunger, illness, now feel like lessons. Each difficulty sharpened your awareness, strengthened your resolve, and reminded you how capable you are of adapting. Out here, survival isn't glamorous. It's a series of small victories, moments where you persist despite discomfort, fear, or uncertainty. And in those victories, you find quiet pride, resilience, and a sense of accomplishment that no easy day could ever teach. Let your mind drift over the prairie, across the dusty roads and quiet towns, and remember that the West is vast, indifferent, and beautiful in its own harsh way. Your body rests, your breathing slows, and each heartbeat settles into a calm, soothing rhythm. The hardships fade, leaving only the gentle hum of existence and the comforting thought
that you have endured another day. Sleep now, letting the West's lessons linger softly in your mind. Tomorrow may arrive with new challenges, but tonight there is only peace, calm, and quiet reflection. Your journey continues, but for now, rest